Hello and welcome, everybody. I wanted to acknowledge, uh, first and foremost, there's a little bit of noise in the background. It is unavoidable, but I am going to try to mute myself as much as possible. But I wanted to say welcome to our Meet the Winemakers series. I'm Marcy Jones, founder of Urban Connoisseurs. I'm not going to go into too much about urban connoisseurs because I really want to focus on some amazing winemakers today. I do want to let you know about the Urban Connoisseurs Scholarship Fund, and I encourage you to learn more about the Scholarship Fund, the Black Winemaker Scholarship Fund, and also our wine club on urbanconnoisseurs.com. So today we have some pretty cool winemakers, and I want to do something new this time around. I want to acknowledge that as winemakers, they are stewards of the land in which they grow the grapes. So I thought it would be appropriate to begin today by acknowledging that these winemakers do their work on ancestral lands of Native peoples uh, who were removed unjustly, and that as winemakers, we are the beneficiaries of that removal. So I want to say we honor them, the Native people, as we live, work, and manage the land, and we pay respect to the elders, both past and present. We thank them for their hospitality. This is in no way a recognition of guilt to anyone. It is more, we want to respect the gift and the opportunity granted us in hopes that we don't take light as caregivers of the vineyards. Now, I'm not a winemaker, but I am from Seattle, Washington, and I acknowledge that I grew up in the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, the first people of Seattle, including the Duwamish people, both past and present. Seattle was named after Chief Seattle, who was chief of the Suquamish and Duwamish tribe. And he was a leading figure among his people. He also pursued a path of accommodation to white settlers, forming a personal relationship with Doc Maynard. So, as I introduce the winemakers who are joining us, I'm going to give you a little bit brief overview of who they are and a little bit about their land acknowledgement. So, I'm shifting between screens, so be patient. I'm going to just kind of do this in a simplistic way, I think, by just going in alphabetical order. So I'm going to bring in Nova Catamatre. Welcome, Nova. How are you?
Good. How are y'all this morning?
I'm good. I was going to do an intro of you, but I'm going to let you do that. But first, before I let you do that, I'm going to talk about. I thought I'd talk about your wines from Trestle 31.
Okay.
Uh, and you can tell more about where you are today, but I know you have Trestle 31, which is located on the Cayugohono Nation, also known as the Cayuga of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And it's inhabited on the 12 Fingers Lake region of New York.
Mhm.
The Cayuga people were displaced and forcibly removed from this region by an attempted act of genocide enacted by the United States in 1779, widely known as the Sullivan-Clinton campaign. Now, I did send you guys an email, and I'm just curious, did you do any research yourself?
on
Land acknowledgement.
the land acknowledgement. I saw that you were going to do a land acknowledgement, and I was not 100% sure what that would entail. I will admit that. But yes,
Okay.
I am aware of the Native American ancestry of the land that we farm in the Finger Lakes. And the amazing thing is the tribes are still very present and active there, although it's obviously not as prevalent as they would have been in, when this happened. But it is very special to be able to see those sites and see the people that are native to the area still involved in the area today. So that is a very nice part of being a part of the Finger Lakes community. So we have several Indian nations in and around that area. We have the Cayuga Nation, which you mentioned, and also the Seneca Indian Nation or Seneca Native American Nation, and then as well as the Onondaga Nation. So there are quite a few active Native American tribes in the area. Oh, you're on mute.
Tell us a little bit about you.
So my name's Nova Katamatri. I grew up in South Carolina, and so I was not exposed to wine as a career at an early age. I kind of fell into it when I was around 2021 by learning about vineyards and viticulture. So I came into it from the agriculture side. So I was originally a horticulture major and learned that you could grow grapevines and make wine from that, which I was very interested in at the time, making something very practical from what you're growing. And so that's how I got into winemaking. I went to school at Cornell University, which is in the Finger Lakes as well. And after that, moved out to California, worked several jobs out here in California, and ended up in Napa. And then I've been living in Napa on and off since 2009. Although I now, as you mentioned, I do go back and forth to the Finger Lakes and make wine out there as well, kind of going back to my college roots there. So I did my first harvest in Pennsylvania and my second and third harvests in New York. So I definitely have a very different background than your average California winemaker for sure. But everybody comes into this industry from a very different path. So it's fun to see that.
I'm going to bring in Shay now. How are you, Shay? Welcome.
Thanks, Marcy. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you. Well, first, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about home of the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla people, which is where Frechette Winery in Benton City is located. And before European contact, the members of the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla people were about 8,000 members strong. In 1855, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla tribes and the U.S. government negotiated a treaty in which 6.4 million acres were ceded in exchange for a reservation homeland of 250,000 acres. As a result of federal legislation in the late 1800s that reduced its size to the Umatilla Reservation, which is now 172,000 acres, and a little bit, I guess 172,000 acres and 158,000 acres, kind of in that range, just east of Pendleton, McKay, Johnson, and McCoy Creek area, southeast of Pilot Rock. So tell us a little bit about Shay Frechette. And did you do your homework?
Yeah, well, the thing about here is so interesting because it's neat to see to hear these tribal names. As you mentioned Cayuse, like there's a Cayuse winery, and Umatilla, like the city of Umatilla, and Walla Walla, so, you know what I mean? So when it comes to tribal history and knowledge. I think sometimes even in our area, even if you don't know these names, like you're saying them because there's so many towns and parks and schools that utilize the name. So that's the really cool thing is that from a historical standpoint, people say these tribal names and they're just, all over the place in our area. Even before I moved here, I remember when Chiawana High School was being built, and I was just like, Chiawana, where they get that, where'd that name come from? But it's just like even as an outsider coming into the area, to hear these names still being present and utilized is just really cool. Oh, and the other thing too, Nova, I'm from South Carolina, born and raised.
Awesome.
Yes. And so when you were talking about not having experience with wine, like I was just like, oh my gosh, I totally get that. Moonshine and corn liquor was where it's at in South Carolina, and now the two we're over here, we're making wine. So that's pretty cool to virtually meet someone else from South Carolina that's doing this. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, as Marcy said,
So,
I'm Schaefer Shed. I'm in Benton City, Washington, which is right outside the Tri-Cities. I'm in Eastern Washington, known as the dry side or the deserty side of the state, and making right now 3,000 cases of wine, mostly reds. Also make one white wine. I work with Simeon, and then one rosé, a rosé of Merlot. Merlot is the varietal that I'll stick with making the rosé. And I make that under a label that was inspired by an event that Marcy put on called Celebration of Black Women in Wine. So I created a sachet label under the Frechette portfolio to house the rosé and also some of the varieties that are kind of play outside the things that we make with Frechette. Frechette focuses on Bordeaux varieties, and Sachet gets to play anywhere she wants to play.
Love that. All right, I am bringing in Theodore Lee. Hi, Theodora. How are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I'm good. I'm here in Dallas taking care of my 95-year-old mother.
Okay. My dad's right behind you. He turns 94 in February.
Well, we're so blessed to have them.
Yes, we are. It is a blessing. So Theodora is the owner of Theophilus Vineyards, which is in the Yorkville Highlands area. Something happened here. Hold on.
Well, I can tell you because.
Okay, tell me. I love it.
Well, the reality for me is when I bought my land, I bought 20 acres. I did not know there had been an Indian reservation on the property. The Pomo Indians basically have the whole area, and that's where they own land all the way to the Pacific Coast in Mendocino County, all the way to Yorkville, all the way to Hopland. They have a casino up in Hopland. So I actually learned when I was getting ready to plant my vineyard that I had to take down some trees. But when you do a forestry plan, that's when they go through the records and find out if there was Indian land. Well, I found out the hard way because it's not in any of the closing papers or documents. It's only when you want to do something with the land that's not traditional that you learn about the Indian reservation. So as part of planting my vineyard, I had to contact the Indians to get permission to plant my vineyard because it did have an Indian. I had to hire an archaeologist to actually, we did digs, to get obsidian, did testing, and it was an ordeal. So I have to honor, legally, I have to honor the Native Americans, and I had to get their permission to actually plant Theophilus Vineyards. So I don't know what you were going to say, but I personally lived it, and I am honored to be able to grow fine grapes that make fine wine on Native American land. And I have Indian in me, but we are from Texas, so it's a different tribe.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about Theopolis Vineyards. What are you growing on your land? Did you already say that?
No, we grow Petite Sirah, and as people say, well, why did you choose to grow Petite Sirah? Well, I had an environmental study. We did soil digs because my property is surrounded by fir and redwood trees, and it's too hot to grow, Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, but I don't get enough sun to grow Cabernet. So, based on the soil test and the environmental study, the consultant suggested Petite Sirah, and I thank him because everyone who has touched my Petite Sirah grapes has made award-winning wines, going back to when I had my first harvest in 2006. Because I didn't really plan to make wine and become a winemaker. I took courses at Davis on agriculture because my love for this business is all about being on my tractor, farming. I learned to drive on a tractor at the age of 8, but we had cattle and horses, and I built fences and post hole digging and all that kind of stuff. And my grandfather was a sharecropper. So my father taught us that if you ever get money, buy land, because they're not making any more of it. And having grown up in South Texas, where he watched his father work his, work his bones off, and basically turn in the cotton to get just enough money to pay the man back for rent. My father left home at the age of 15 because he did not want that life. And so land ownership to me is the key for all of us to sustain and build wealth for generations to come.
Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to bring in Phil Long. Hold on. There we go. Welcome, Phil. And I think there's a little bit of static with someone. Can you maybe mute Theodora?
Well,
And Phil, I need you to, first let's see where the static is. Can you mute Theodora?
I'm trying to mute, but I don't have any static here.
Okay, well, hold on. Let me play with mine and see if I can. Yep, it was you. So I'll unmute you when I need to bring you back in. But Phil, did you do your homework?
You kidding, girl? It's harvest.
All right, I'm going to ask because I give kudos to the ones that knew. So Longevity Wines, which is located in Livermore Valley in California, is on the ancestral home and unceded territory of the Pelnin and Ohlone tribelet, who led the large freshwater marsh, who held the large freshwater marsh that is the Western Livermore Valley and the most of Pleasanton and Suno Ridges. The land was stolen by the Spanish, Mexican, and then American profiteers through acts of forced servitude, genocide, and deceit. And so, Phil, you want to tell us a little bit about Phil and who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my history with the Valley goes back to, and my knowledge of the history goes back to the fact that Livermore won the Paris Exposition in 1896, long before Napa ever did. But in 1896, you couldn't turn on the TV and find out what happened. So, anyway, yeah, my name is Phil Long. I'm the founder, owner, and winemaker here at Longevity Wines in the beautiful Livermore Valley. We were established in the Valley in 2008. 2018, we were voted Livermore Valley's Winery of the Year. We're now the third largest brand in the Valley behind Wente and Concannon, and we are distributed internationally at this point. Unmute.
Thank you, Phil, for that. I'm going to bring in Kurt. Is it Kurt or Curtis?
It's Curtis. Kurt, that works too. How you guys doing?
morning.
Good. Nice to meet you. Did
Nice
you do
to meet
your
you as
homework,
well.
Curtis?
Same with Phil. A little busy with harvest, to be honest. But
Okay.
it's interesting because Constellation, we're working on a river restoration project out in Wappo Hill, our vineyard in Stag's Leap. And while we were kind of digging up some dirt and moving things around, they actually found some remains and kind of artifacts from, I believe, the Wappo tribe. So it's super interesting that it's kind of in our daily processes and things that we do out in the vineyard. It's a piece of the history and a piece of the culture, and it's interesting to learn and hear about it.
Okay. Well, yes, I thank you for finding that out. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the Wapo people. The Wapo are a group of three similar speaking people: the Northern Mishawah, which are the warrior people of Alexander Valley and Southern Lake County; the Central Mutitstu group of the Knights Valley and Eastern Sonoma County; and the Mayakama, meaning water going out place, of the southern tidal areas of Napa and Sonoma valleys. Their staunch resistance to invasion and cultural destruction earned them the Spanish name Guapo, meaning daring, brave, or handsome. In phonetic English, Guapo came to be pronounced Wapo, but the tribe referred to themselves as the Honestus, the people who speak plainly or outspoken. So tell us a little bit about Curtis.
Well, I grew up in California. I've been living in California my entire life. I grew up in the South Bay, so in Sunnyvale, California, outside of San Jose. Um, my winemaking career kind of started at UC Davis. I went to school there for my undergrad and entered as a mechanical engineer major, and quickly kind of learned that that's not what I wanted to do, and took some general classes about viticulture and enology, and just thought it was super fun and interesting how it's the balance between agriculture, science, and art. And just kind of kept rolling with it and started working in Napa Valley and haven't left since. So currently the senior winemaker over at Robert Mondavi Winery in Oakville, California. So, a great history of winemaking, and it's a really great place to be.
I'm playing with that doggone mute. Hey, Melissa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So Simi Winery is in Hillsburg, correct?
It is, yeah.
Did you do your history, Melissa?
I did moments ago.
Well, give us what you got. Give us what
Okay,
you got.
this
Don't
is
you
what I
love
have.
Google?
So to Curtis's point about the Wapo Indian tribe, I'm familiar with them, but probably more compelling as regards Simi Winery is that we actually source fruit from the Lytton band of the Pomo Indians. So we actually source Sauvignon Blanc from them. So there you go.
Nice. All right. So tell us a little bit about Melissa.
So I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and didn't really know a whole lot about wine at all. I moved to Bellingham, Washington after dropping out of college. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. Was out wine tasting on Lopez Island one day, which is one of the San Juan Islands.
Love Lopez, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful pastoral island. So we were tasting wine. This was back in 1994. And I discovered that you could go to school to learn how to make wine. And it was sort of this aha moment for me. I really wasn't doing much else at the time. And so I decided to move from Bellingham, Washington, down to the Napa Valley and did a fair share of apprenticing actually in the Napa Valley. Mondavi, Sterling, Joseph Phelps, Peter Michael, and then did get a degree at UC Davis in enology and viticulture. Took my first assistant winemaker position at La Crema and spent the next 10 years making wine at La Crema. And then after that, spent 4 years at J Vineyards and Winery until Gallo purchased that. And then I moved to Constellation Brands in 2015. So I've been making wine at Simi now for nearly 3 years.
Okay, pretty cool stuff there. And last but certainly not least, I am bringing in Adrian Valenzuela. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, that's right, Marcy.
Okay. Did you do your homework, Adrian?
I did not. I kind of was with Melissa and tried to Google something, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, all right. So what I found out was that your area is on the land in Monterey County. The Constanoan Rumsen, which is part of the Ohlone tribe, are the indigenous people of the Central California coastal area, and existed peaceably in this region for thousands of years before Spanish missionaries arrived in the 1760s. After years of enslavement under the Spanish missionary system, the tribe was forced into exile to avoid violent persecution by settlers, and California state sponsored racist policies toward Native Americans. The Constanoan Rumsen tribe moved to Southern California and found work on the ranchos in 1864. So tell us a little bit about you on that land down there on the California Central Coast.
Well, I got something completely different. I was looking up the Esalen tribe, which I think was over in Big Sur in the Santa Lucia Highlands. So my name's Adrian. I grew up here on the Central Coast, born and raised in Salinas, California, which is just about 15 minutes inland from the coast to Monterey. We're known as the salad capital of the world. So I grew up around ag and produce. I think that's really just where everybody tends to go. But I was actually studying biology, thinking I was going to become a nurse practitioner. And I needed 200 hours of lab experience to get into the nursing school, which then I applied to Gonzalez Winery, which is part of Constellation Brands, and I actually got the internship in the lab and kind of never looked back. Just walking around the winery, walking around the cellar during harvest that first year in 2012. I was just intrigued, and I love being outside. I love camping, so that kind of drew me towards wanting to experience something a little more. I put school on hold, and in 2013, I worked my second harvest, which was formerly known as Estancia Winery, and actually made wine in my parents' garage that year. And I just remember tasting fermenters throughout the day, and I remember driving throughout Salinas and the row crops and being able to smell the produce that was actually planted for like the first time, besides broccoli and lettuce and stuff like that. But being able to drive through like strawberry fields and being able to smell those aromas coming off the land, it was really amazing. So I kind of just hit it full force and was promoted to enologist, assistant winemaker, and now I'm a winemaker there at Gonzalez Winery with Constellation Brands. Two of the big brands that we produce are the Robert Mondavi Private Selection and Mayomi brands.
Okay. So I'm going to unmute Theodora there. It sounds much clearer. And so some of you guys answered just in your intro, why wine versus another career path. But if you didn't, tell us why wine versus another career path. And anyone can answer these questions.
I can jump in because initially when I went into college, I was going to major in flute. And so that's a very different path from what I ended up. And it really, if you think about it, though, it's not that different because I consider winemaking a performing art, just like music or dance or jazz or anything like that, because every vintage is different. And it's up to us as winemakers to translate what the vintage is giving us into a liquid art form. And so even though it seems very odd to go from flute to winemaking, it actually, I don't think, requires an entirely different skill set, maybe a little bit more heavy on the science side, but the creativity is very similar.
Wow. I love that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say I had a similar experience in that I went right to college out of high school and initially studied psychology, and then I shifted to nursing, and it just wasn't really passionate about it. I guess maybe I'm idealistic, but I thought, man, if I'm going to have a career, I'm going to love it. And so that's why I ended up just dropping out and not doing much for a few years, and then finally found wine. But I was 28 when I discovered that you could go to school to learn how to make wine and then just make wine as a career. So thankfully, yeah, I don't have a second choice. So it's a good thing it's working out.
Anybody else? That's a good second choice.
I'll jump in. Kind of like someone else said, I wasn't exposed to wine growing up. I think even in college, which I have a degree in architecture from Cal Poly Pomona, I don't think I knew wine was made in this country, to be honest with you. Aggies were just the guys that walked around with the cowboy boots and cowboy hats and kind of smelled a little funny. But that was my experience. But once Deborah and I started getting out and enjoying wine and loving wine, once we moved to Northern California, it's part of the fabric of life. And we just started making wine in the garage, and here we are today.
Wow. Anybody else?
This is Theo. Turn off the printer because when the phone rings, it actually turns on the ringer of the fax machine. Maybe I should let that go. But in any event, I do have a dual career. I still practice law for my time, and I found wine through the law. And being from Texas, I really wasn't exposed to fine wine, but I was exposed to muscadine. Now, those folks from South Carolina and being from Texas, you're familiar with wild muscadine that grows everywhere. And my dad used to take wild muscadine and make homebrew. I ran away from wine because I thought wine was muscadine. And then when I moved to California, my law firm mentors would invite me to drink wine. I'm like, no, I don't want anything to do it. And they say, wow. I said, muscadine is the wine that I heard about and tasted, and it is nasty. I don't want anything to do it. They're like, that's totally different. This is California. You make fine wine. And that's when I was finally exposed to it. And I got the bug because they had vineyards. And I'm like, I can really go back to my roots in farming and be a great farmer, which is what drew me to the business. Being a farmer, I love being outside in the vineyard, doing basically pruning. And I too went to Davis, not with a degree, but I took 4 of their courses, the 4 seasons of growing grapes, managing a small vineyard. There's a number of courses that you can take on Saturdays, and I did that. And I learned a lot about winemaking. I learned about vineyards. And for me, I agree with Nova that wine is an art. And to me, farming is so important because great wine starts in the vineyard. And that's why, for me, the vineyard and the land is so important.
Okay. Theodora, you might want to try putting on some headphones, maybe. I don't know what that static is, but maybe just give that a try. And so, my next question, do you think it is important to diversify the wine industry? And if you do, why? Anybody can shoot some answers to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I think it's important to diversify the industry in general. If there's not just one proper way to make wine. There's different ways to do it and achieve fine wine, quality wine. So I think that if you get people with different backgrounds, different beliefs, different process to get somewhere. You can make a wine that's better. It might not be the way that you learn how to do it. It might be a better way, it might be a worse, but it's kind of getting different viewpoints from different people to understand the best way to make it. And, there's so many different wine styles, and we could just kind of go on and on about it, but it's special to see the different people and how they interpret their wines and make it. And it makes it more fun for customers to be able to taste all different wines across the world.
Great. I like that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I apologize if there's wine pumps running in the background, but yes, it is harvest. It's really interesting. Even though the landscape of wine drinkers is changing, is evolving, it still looks nothing like the landscape of the people that make the wine. And that's the question. Why is that? Why isn't the landscape of who, or the diversity of who drinks wine, how come it doesn't look like that of the people who make the wine? And I think that's, as part of our goal of AAAV to try to make that, to try to change that.
Like that. Anybody else?
Well, is this better?
Much better.
Okay,
Love
I think what happened, I was speaking through my computer, and now I'm speaking through a Jabra, which is designed for these things. So I apologize. I thought I was on Jabra, but I wasn't. To me, like any profession, diversity is key because you get better product. I think when you bring a different perspective to the process, you're going to have an ability to get greater product, diverse product. And it's good to have someone in the room that looks like you. And, like many of us didn't know. I mean, my mentors were white men or white women, but we can be mentored by all people. But I think little Black girls and Native American girls ought to be able to see people like us so they know this is an option. Because everybody here, we're saying we didn't know winemaking was an option. We, if your only idea of wine is muscadine, you ain't gonna be no winemaker, okay? You don't want to have nothing to do with wine. So it's good to have diversity because it encourages others to pursue that profession or career.
Okay, great responses. What are some of the things or activities do you participate in to help diversify the industry?
Well, one of the things that we've been focusing on is trying to figure out how to get younger students involved in agriculture and interested in that as a career path. And so, events like this are a great way to talk about this. We've also talked about, well, how do we make people understand that agriculture is a path that it's not, as Phil said, just people in cowboy boots, like stomping around, on farms all day. Like it's really a great industry to be in. As Theodora said, you get to be outside, you get to experience nature, and it's really getting that message out so that when students are deciding what they want to major in college, that they're considering it as a career. Because I do believe that we have to start at that beginning level of people coming into college, because otherwise the candidate pool that are people applying for jobs looks just like it always has been, and so that I think getting that change to happen is really important.
Great. Adrian, I think you started to say something.
Giving exposure to just what winemaking is here in my local community. But way that I've done that is joining a young or a small organization called the Young Farmers and Ranchers of Monterey County. So me and along with a couple other winemakers have done multiple tastings and like panel sessions, discussions such as this with that organization. Monterey County, as I mentioned, is focused on ag primarily. There's a lot of vineyards around, but the wine industry itself is still pretty small within our local community. So just giving exposure in that manner and letting people know like, hey, winemaking is an option. Winemaking is similar to ag and produce, and we still grow grapes and farm the land and bring that and harvest that fruit and bring it into the winery. So.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Yes, as Phil mentioned, the Association of African American Vintners is very key on trying to expand and educate. It has been part of the mission for years, and Phil is the current president. I happen to be one of the charter members going back to when I was just growing grapes. But I also recently started a scholarship for agriculture and at UC Davis. I just posted the link in our chat because I truly believe, we have a lot of scholarship funds that teach people to become, wine educators or become a sommelier or become, something other than a winemaker, learning the art of making wine, learning all about uh, the land. And so for me, it was very important to do something to encourage diversity in actually learning ecology, learning viticulture. All of those things for me are important. And so I figured I should put my money where my interest is. And, this is a seed. I started this fund, and according to the UC Davis, they are using that to solicit other funds, and they have created a diversity program to recruit and try to bring people of color, particularly Black folks. Obviously, there are laws that you have to comply, that you can't just advertise anything just for a particular race. But I thought it was important to work with a school of viniculture to actually create an opportunity. And the goal is to provide $10,000 every year to a person of color who is interested in actually learning about growing grapes and making wine.
And to kind of
That's
follow
good.
up what everybody else is talking about, this is exactly right. The awareness that this is even a career path when you're young and you're going to school. That's the first goal. You've got to create awareness among young people, and then the second challenge is always the financial challenge. And we're involved in several scholarships, one with Marcia, with the United Negro College Fund, Napa Valley Wine Academies, Sonoma State University, and even on the kind of to touch on what Theodora was saying, even on the scholarships through Sonoma State University, we don't restrict it to just African Americans. But one of the questions on the application is, how do you plan to create more diversity in this industry? So that really is the goal overall, is to create more diversity.
Yeah, good responses. So if you had, and I think I said 60 seconds in the email, but if you had 30 seconds, you're in the elevator with a young student, and that student happens to tell you they're majoring in agriculture, how would you convince them to make that shift?
I say agriculture is a great industry. Obviously, growing things is a great industry. But I got to tell you, and I think everybody sitting here, there is something very, very satisfying about the process of wine, because it doesn't stop once the product is picked. It actually starts long before and finishes long after. And I think the process is probably the most fascinating part.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with Phil on that. Like, my favorite thing about this industry is it's the only industry that I know of that you can actually grow something in like an agriculture environment, then you personally can make something out of that, and then you personally can go sell it. Like, you see every part of the supply chain and then can talk about it with your end consumer. And that's so rare in just general agriculture. So to me, that's really the exciting part of it.
And I think too that there's a vintage, and I think that that's really an important part of making wine, right? That you get to mark a vintage And that is a real special element to growing grapes and making wine.
And I would say
Yes.
this is the only industry where the fruits of your labor actually create pleasure in a bottle.
I
Well
love
said.
that. Yes, because we don't get so much pleasure from carrots and carrot juice. We just know it's good
Absolutely
for
not.
us. Or the green juice, which seems to be the fad now.
That's actually
Yes.
what Melissa said was exactly what drew me to it. I remember asking one of my first mentors, like, you don't get tired of this, you don't get tired and bored of just making wine year after year, but every vintage is so different. I mean, obviously weather has an effect on row crops and just the ag industry, but you're really just growing one thing or produce throughout the year, every year after. So that's the one thing that I enjoy about this industry.
Right. I love that. What makes a good grape? Somebody.
I think what I'm looking for, and it's a great question because we are making we made a decision today to pick Cabernet Franc from our estate vineyard. And we go through and we're chewing through fruit all the time. And I'm personally really looking for balance. I'm looking for flavor, but and I'm also pulling my numbers and looking at that. But my real indicator is what my palate, like what I pick up on my palate. And I was having dinner with one of two of my growers last night, and I work very closely with them. And that question you asked before on how do you steer folks, I love working with growers. I love to work with more women of color growers, whether it be someone in agronomy or a vineyard manager or someone who owns a vineyard. Like that sort of like that excites me to see more people of color who own vineyards and who are in leadership roles there. But to answer your question on what I'm looking for, I really am looking for balance. I'm looking for fruit that's not too acidic, that it's not too tart, that has good sugar, where the seeds are nice and crunchy and brown, where I don't get astringency from them. So I guess what I'm trying to get is a perfect, what I think is a perfect, perfect fruit in my mind. The numbers may not be ideal, but in my mind, when I feel like it's beautifully balanced and the sugar's there, the acid, the pH, everything is on my palate the way that I like it. And I think balance is key for me.
I'm just going to say it's all going to come down to that email from Wine Enthusiast or Wine Spectator.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I totally agree with Phil. The scores actually definitely help to define what is a good grape. But I think going back to what Shay said, we pick at a certain Brix level, and that's the sugar. And that's important because you don't want to pick too soon, but you don't want it so high that you have to use water to bring the sugar level down. The seeds and the balance, all the things that Shay said are important. But then in the winemaking process, the grapes are very important, but I think the making of the wine, the barrel selection, I think how long we age it, the press, all of that play a key role in the end product. And I don't just look at your question as what makes a good grape, because we're talking about making wine. And the grape is the
Love it.
beginning, but the process is as important as the great grape.
Great. Melissa, you were going to say something?
Yeah, because I mean, going back to the question about the grape, I had a good like I've been making Pinot most of my career, but I had a good moment actually with Nova about a week and a half ago, because a good grape is different, back to the vintages, right? Like this is a very compressed vintage that we're living right now, and the Brix is very high. But the tannins are not very resolved. And I asked Nova, like, hey, this Cabernet, the skins are just really chalky. And what should I do? Like, what do you think I could do in the winery? And she's like, oh, well, you just have to wait. So I think sometimes like a good grape is patience. And I'm not the most patient person. So I think having that patience is a good quality to have, or at least a good quality to cultivate to be able to identify those good grapes and when to bring them in.
Yeah, back to Theodore, just really quick. You can make wine in about 3 steps. It's horrible. You can make a decent wine in about 100 steps, but it's the 1,000 decisions a winemaker makes along his journey that define us as winemakers.
That's good. That's good.
Can
So
I just
what is,
piggyback on?
oh, go
Can I
ahead. Yeah.
piggyback on what Theo was saying? I think what
Mhm.
when she was saying that, I think that's important. Like if you are my opinion, just my thoughts on it. If you're going to become a winemaker, I think it's also important to really understand the viticultural aspect as well, and the decisions that you make, and how that impacts. So, when I'm out, as Theodore was saying, like when you're looking at bricks level. So when I'm looking at, okay, there's something that I really, really want that's not there just yet, but the sugar is there. I know that the decision that I make is going to impact my activities in the production side. So what's the consequence of allowing more hang time for that fruit? And what are the types of things I'm going to have to do on the production side, to make up for that? The higher the sugar, then the higher the alcohol. So how does that play in the end result? But if someone just goes into it and it's just like, I just want to be in the production, so like, I just want to, make wine. Whereas a winemaker, you're having to make a pick decision. You're telling the vineyard that you're sourcing from when you want that picked. And so those decisions, the decision that you make, even from where you're sourcing the fruit from. For me, I'm exclusive Red Mountain, but I used to source from, in general, the Columbia Valley. And so making those decisions on where I'm picking from can determine the result that I'm getting. So I would encourage anyone that wants to come into winemaking to understand a lot of different components of the business, making the wine, what's happening on the land, and also how to sell wine. Because winemaking, they say it's the easy part is making it, which I mean, I wouldn't totally agree with that because the vintage can give us some different things, but you also have to know how to sell that wine.
Yeah, it's funny when you first asked the question, like the answer, well, it depends, popped into my head because it depends on so many factors. Like what consumer are you targeting? What price point are you targeting? What area of the country or the world are you in? Because the perfect grape in Napa is different from the perfect grape in Sonoma, and the perfect grape in Livermore, and the perfect grape in Washington, and the perfect grape in New York and Central Coast. And so it's such a complex, it's a simple question, but a very complex answer.
But it still was a question worth asking, and I think people want to hear your point of view of all of that. And so, going on from there, what is your favorite process, or what process of the winemaking, whether it's from soil to glass, or grape to glass? What do you love the most, and why?
That's easy.
Curtis? Oh.
That's easy. Checking iDig and the data and seeing how many cases have shipped.
That's not the winemaking process, Phil.
Like she said, the hardest part is the selling of the wine.
Okay.
And that is part of the process, Marcy. I mean, for me, harvest is my favorite time of the whole winemaking process. Selling, obviously, I also get very happy when we get those scores. If you get a 96 from Wine Enthusiast, and your wines are going to be on the top 100, that's very exciting. And then it's very exciting when you look at your monthly. But to me, I got into this because of the agriculture. And so at harvest, when we're pulling those grapes, and this is a light year, for instance, on the Pinot, we weren't able to get, I mean, and this is the part that people don't understand. one weekend, they were perfect. And we couldn't get anybody to pick them. We found someone 5 days later, and the wild turkeys had eaten them and they had shriveled. So just in 5 days, we had 3 tons of Pinot ready to pick. 5 days later, we only got 1.5 tons. Okay. And so, because of the small tonnage, we did a different type of press. Okay. Because we did it with stumping. And that's exciting. Okay. And so, harvest is one of the most challenging times, but it also is the exciting part because you're actually in that process of, destemming. And I mean, I just like that. I mean, that's just my personality.
Nice, nice. Curtis, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I really enjoy, as Theodora was saying, the beginning part of harvest, the part of walking vineyards, working with your vineyard team, kind of understanding what the vintage is going to give you. It's pretty exciting walking through vineyards, seeing how the fruit's setting, how the canopy's looking. You kind of get a sense of what this year is going to give you. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. You don't know if you're going to have labor. You don't know if you're going to have time, but you know that the grapes are maturing and they're starting to look good. So it's super exciting. That's the fun part for me.
Cool. Thank you. Shay, were you getting ready to say something?
I probably have a few different things that's most exciting. I love the work. I love working with my growers. I source from some vineyards where the growers, all they do is grow wine grapes, and so they sell to different winemakers. And my favorite is when I go into a vineyard and another winemaker's row is next to mine, and that winemaker's there because they're trying to make a pick decision as well. And so then it's just easy to ask, like, so what are you looking for? Because I'm going to pick, and I'm not picking right now, but it looks like you're going to make a pick decision to pull that fruit in tomorrow. And so I think that kind of that sharing of knowledge and why they're doing it, why they're picking and what they're looking for, to me is super exciting. And just collaborating with growers. I also love when I love blending. That's one of my favorite things to do. And I also love the bottling process because I think that's super, super, super exciting and we leave everything, I don't want to pay for my glass too early and have it here because I don't have a whole lot of space. And so I get my glass here at the last possible moment, my corks, my labels, my cap, like everything. And so that part's super exciting when I'm working with all my vendors and they're just like, Shay, can I get the green light? Yes, green light, go. And it's just so, I don't know, just super exciting. So that to me, I do love the beginning of harvest, but middle to end, I really don't care for harvest anymore because I'm exhausted and I have no sleep and everything's just so monotonous. It's cleaning stuff and pressing. And so beginning of harvest, super excited and stoked. Towards the middle end, not my favorite.
Nice. Anybody else?
Well, I could definitely, I like I said, I'm like Theodora. I love the farming aspect of it. I love being in vineyards. And so any day that I can be in a vineyard, even even during pruning, like I really love pruning because it's a reset and kind of allows me to mentally reset for the year. And one of my early winemaking mentors was both the vineyard manager and the winemaker. And he said, I start thinking about the wine I'm going to make at pruning. And he really kind of enforced that in me that it's not just harvest through, like it's the whole thing that you have to think about with the vintage. And so, at pruning, you really think about this, there's so many opportunities and so many ways this vintage could go. And it's just kind of that possibilities that gets very exciting at that point. And then, obviously you go through harvest and everything. And I do love harvest. I agree with Shay. There's a lot of repetition and cleaning, but I really enjoy the prospect of harvest because then you see the culmination of all the hard work that's been done in the vineyard. And that really kind of comes to reality at that point. Once it's off the vine and in the tank, you're like, oh yes, we did it.
Nice. So this wasn't on my list of questions, but I'm sure people want to know how the pandemic and climate change has affected how you grow, when you harvest, anything. Anybody want to share?
I can speak to just the pandemic now that this is the second vintage that we have had COVID around. Obviously, harvest is a very intense time, and last year we began to work in pods. So winemakers were very separate from one another, which is very different from normally what we do because winemaking is a real collaboration. So it's hard to be sort of separate from one another. And we wanted to do that because we really didn't want, you know, all the winemakers to get COVID at one time. That would have been a little bit challenging. Another challenge is we haven't been able to bring in international interns, um, which we do annually through a company called Cape. And that's made the labor issues, especially this year, really noticeable. So that's been tough. As far as climate change, I can just speak specifically to the drought that we're in right now. Lots of water issues, and it probably contributed to the compressed nature of this harvest in that Cabernet Brix was very high when normally it wouldn't have been. High Brix a month earlier than the Cab would have been. So yeah.
Oh,
I will add to that. I'm up in Mendocino, and we really have had struggles with water. And I attribute it directly to climate change. I also contribute the extreme heat. I mean, this summer was so hot in Mendocino that people picked earlier. We had smaller crops, the higher bricks level, but everything was more susceptible to actually pruning early. And so it has not been good for the Mendocino County growers. Fortunately, where my property is located, and I source my Pinot from my neighbors in the Yorkville Highlands, and so we've had various issues. My symphony, because of the drought, we have less fruit. Fortunately, because of the being surrounded by fir and redwoods and petite Syrah not needing full sun, we were pretty fortunate with each harvest because we have the bricks at about 24, we have the seeds, but most important, the flavor. And we have been able to pick and get everything in the barrel. I'm coming down to Adrian. I think you said Santa Lucia Highlands is where you are. I actually play around with Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot, and I'm still waiting for that to come in. I don't get involved directly in that vineyard because I'm not down there, but I do like the fruit. So we're waiting for that to pick this week.
Nice.
So,
Which vineyard?
I like I said, I don't get involved.
You don't get involved.
I can't even tell you the name of the vineyard.
Okay.
But we're waiting for it to come in because I have everything else in, but that's the one that I don't get involved in. And all I know is it's coming in. I make my wine in San Francisco in a co-op. And similar to Melissa, the collaboration between the various winemakers who work there, even though we're working on different wines and they're different winemakers, the collaboration process, because we've not been able to have more than 2 people in the winery at any time. So we've lost that. And I'll have to go back to what Phil said. The most challenging thing is we have not, because we're small producers all making wine in San Francisco, we usually have, tastings throughout the year. We haven't been able to do that in 2 years. I mean, fortunately, virtual tastings have saved most of us.
Yeah, and nobody's really touched upon it yet, but we all know it's around us. Climate change and the fires we've had to deal. This is the first vintage, I think, in 3 years we haven't had to deal with smoke. We had heavy smoke taint the last couple of years in a lot of the vineyards. This year, knock on wood, we're pretty good. And COVID has just been a hot mess. We're still requiring masks inside, and we're just going to keep following the rules and try to make up that six figures we've lost in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would say as a winemaker, I totally agree, Phil. Like the fires to me are just devastatingly scary because there's no real way to fix that. Like pretty much all the other problems that we come across are fixable somehow, but we haven't figured that one out yet. So to me, that's a real scary proposition. And, really here it's driven by the heat, as Theodora said, the lack of water and the drought, like Melissa was talking about. On the East Coast, the problem is also water, but too much of it, not enough. So it's interesting the way that the weather patterns have shifted. Because used to we'd get small rainstorms every couple of days, but not as significant at one time. But in August this year, I had a grower that got 7 inches of rain in a 24-hour period in August.
Wow.
So that's in 2019, there was a 9-inch storm that was washing vineyards down into the lake practically, so it's a very different situation to be dealing with for having too much water versus not having enough water. I wish we could send some of the water out this way. That'd be really cool.
By plane.
To follow up, it's not that we don't get water. We just don't know how to keep water. If you look at how much runs off into the ocean every year here, even in Northern California, and you can go to the Sahara Desert, and I forget which country has figured it out, how to keep the water, and they're flourishing. And we can't do it with all our technology. What's wrong with that? I think we need to start going from solar requirements to cistern requirements because we just don't know how to keep it.
Wow. Well, I was going to say the other challenge that we're seeing, and I don't know, Shay, if you're seeing this issue in Washington as well, is the destabilization of the polar vortex. And we saw that go as far south as Texas this past winter. And so I think that's going to be a big concern because cold damage during winter could be really devastating to the industry. So that's another part of it that I'm really concerned about.
You want to share a little bit about, Shay, any kind of climate issues or the effects of pandemic in Washington?
The climate issues, I mean, it's crazy because it's not just, one thing. I think that just listening, you're covering, just if it were one thing, I think it would be a little bit, we always get nervous about smoke and smoke taint. And then we had like a very hotter than usual June and July, which, I mean, we get into the hundreds here, but at the wrong time of the year can be very devastating. So yields are low, berry size is small, juices, it's just everything is, all those components. We do worry about frost. So we're just getting hit from all over the place. Not a fun thing to deal with when it comes to climate change and fruit. For the pandemic, I think for us, of course, it's been just like a lot of my colleagues here, devastating in a few different ways, especially financially, and also with trying to recruit great talent for our teams. We've had some learnings too. I think for us, we've never really utilized the virtual platform, and when we first had this stay-at-home order, within days we went into doing mystery wine challenges, which we had never done before, and that was something that really took off. We never really looked at e-commerce as we just never really put much into that because we are 100% direct consumer, and mostly folks come into our tasting room. But when we were shut down, it was just like, what other options do we have? And we were really behind the curve on that. And so we've had the opportunity to build our e-commerce business, and so that to us was just like, wow, this is something that doesn't go away. Maybe we should put more emphasis, on that. So I still say we're still in recovery phase. I mean, our brand hasn't recovered. We just haven't recovered just yet. And so we're still dealing with the devastation of the pandemic. By no means are we going out of business or anything like that. But when it comes to where our business should be, we're definitely behind the curve on that.
Okay. Curtis, Adrian, you guys want to add anything?
I mean, as Theodora just noted, I mean, she's going to be maybe picking Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot this week, and we're in the first week of October. I don't know. People would look at you like you were crazy if you were picking Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot in October. I think usually the middle of September, you're already on the later aspect of harvesting SLH Pinot. So, yeah, as everybody else is like, we saw the weather just. We actually had a really cool summer down here on the Central Coast. We haven't really had many warm days, but same thing with the growing season, the growing year. Cabernet ripening far before Brix levels, before Pinot and some of these other early ripening white grapes that we usually bring into the winery. And for the pandemic, one thing that I've enjoyed about this industry is I'm an extrovert. I like hanging out with people. I like going out and grabbing a drink with my fellow companions. And yeah, it's just been hard. It's been hard, especially like Melissa said, we've kind of segregated over into pods as well, just to keep people safe and not have the entire team go out at once. But it was tough. It's tough to get through harvest and through a really busy year and not be able to have lunch with your coworkers and not get to hang out and just talk for 30, 45 minutes throughout the day. That's one thing that I enjoy about where I work, and the team that I work with, we get along great. So it's almost like, man, I asked myself a couple times, just being honest, like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Like, this is not fun. I don't enjoy this right now because I enjoy the people that I work with, and I wasn't able to enjoy that camaraderie.
Curtis?
Yeah, with the pandemic, I think it's caused us to look at the different ways that we're working and possibly improving on some of those. So, before COVID, we had a lot of meetings in person and spent a lot of time talking, but I think it gave us a chance to step back and look at our meeting and say, okay, well, is this actually effective? Do we need this? It kind of gave us a chance to look at our processes to see if there's better ways of working. Maybe we don't all need to be together at certain times, and there's different ways to communicate. And it also enabled us to improve our communication because we weren't always at the same site together in the same room. So we had to improve those ways that we do talk to each other to make sure that everything's getting done in the winery. So there's been some positives that came out of the pandemic, even though it's been tough for sure.
Yeah. Great feedback, you guys. Well, we're about an hour and 15 minutes in. I have one question, and I want everyone to answer this question just for the fun of it. You are invited to live on a remote island for 10 years. This island has a population of 150 adults. They all drink wine. You are in charge of the land. Don't you just love that? And what is planted? You can only plant one varietal. That will be the nation's drink of choice. What would you plant and why? And everybody has to answer.
All right. I don't think people are going to probably be like, what in the world? But I would do Gamay. Gamay, why? Just because you can make diverse wines with that. I think you can go try to make rosé. You can make some bubbles with it, as well as a lighter style red wine. So if on a hot day, hot afternoon, you can drink it chilled, and then you can try to make it a little bit darker and age it in some barrel or something and have it with some dinner. But Gamay, bizarre. Why? I was thinking about it this morning, and I'm like, I'm going to say Gamay.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'd have to go Pinot Noir. I mean, it's similar reasoning to Adrian, but you can make sparkling with it. You can make a really nice white wine with it. You can make a rosé with it. You can make a red wine with it. You know, it's very, very versatile. So I'm pretty confident that with Pinot, I could make something for everybody in that group that they would be happy with.
Anybody?
Well, my
Theodore,
first thought was that this was a tropical island, and it's going to be hot all year round. After listening to everybody else's answers, you know, Grenache is my Pinot, so I think I'd do Grenache because, again, you can do rosé, you can do a really nice fruity red wine, and again, trying to satisfy everybody, I think that's where I'd go.
And I would say Pinot as well. Favorite grape variety. That's my jam. And if I had to drink one wine for 10 years, I'll take Pinot.
Okay.
Well, I am going to be different than you guys because I tend to like a more full-bodied wine. And I actually would need, you know, because I only grow Petit Terroir, I don't know how difficult it is to grow Cab or Zinfandel, but I would want something like a Cab. I mean, if I had to drink one wine for the rest of my life, okay, and I had to, you know, share it with others on the island, I think I would go with a Cab. And even though it is a bigger wine than a Pinot Noir, you can make a rosé of Cab, okay? And to me, if I'm going to drink, I want it to be pretty bold. And if anybody knows me, I do the Pinot, and I play around with Pinot because I'm not a big Pinot fan. But when I was told that it is the #1 red grape sold in America and people drink more Pinot than any other red wine, I had to get on the bandwagon. And just so you know, I did look up who I pay. Mansfield Dunn. That's the vineyard in Santa Lucia Highlands. But I don't get involved in all of the details with them. I just buy the fruit. He actually is one of the guys that makes wine in the co-op where I make wine in San Francisco. So I know I've tasted his fruit in the barrel. So that's why when we only got, you know, 1 ton of Yorkville Highlands, I needed more Pinot. So, and I usually every other year I go down there, but I think I'm going to stick with Cab because, you know, you got to go with what you like, quite frankly.
Okay.
And most people like Cab, but Pinot is the #1. And I think if we really were doing it for the rest of the world and everybody on the island, Pinot would be the choice. But I gotta defer to the Cab.
Oh man, what if Theodora were stuck on my island? She would be bumming.
Well, but it's how you make the Pinot. I would have to tell you that part of why I didn't like Pinot is because I don't want to say, maybe there's some people down here, but the Willamette Valley and France, the minerality, you know, the earth tones. I just say that's another way of saying dirt. Okay, because you know, I'm not drinking wine for the dirt. I'm drinking wine for the fruit. But if you actually do wine differently, you can make a very good Pinot Noir where you have a little bit of forest floor, but it's not the predominant feature. Okay, and you know, forest floor is a key component of Pinot, and that's my problem with it. But Melissa, I bet if you made a Pinot on the island, I would be able to drink it.
And When you say fungi,
Oh my goodness. Shay or Curtis?
When I went to, I thought about like trying to pick a variety that I could that was a little more versatile, that I could do a lot of stuff with. I kept coming back to Cabernet Sauvignon. I think it's probably because you know, being in Washington, it's the most widely grown variety. It's easy to get, a lot of clones we offer here, and it's just a variety that I'm super comfortable with. And I think that the folks on the island would just know it. And then I guess I would be the, if I get to decide, it means I'm the person in power of deciding. So it's something that I like and something I think that everybody else would enjoy. So I think I stick with Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay, okay.
Now we got a
Curtis?
little competition here.
I know.
Yeah.
Pinot, Gamay. Curtis, what do you
Man,
do?
hearing
What would you
about
have?
Pinot, that's a pretty good idea. I mean, you can make the bubbles, you can make the still wine, make the rosé, but I'm a big fan of Cabernet Franc. I think, you know, everyone loves Pinot and Cab, but I love Cab Franc. There's just, you know, you got the fruit, the herbal elements, and the aromatics that are just gorgeous, and you can make that, you know, really big or lighter style. So I think that'd be a fun one to have on the island.
Wow. And I love Cabernet Franc. Yes, yes. And
Yeah, and
so,
Melissa and I's island Pinot might be challenged because somebody said, well, nobody said if this is a humid island or not. And let me tell you, growing Pinot in humidity, that's a special type of crazy for sure.
Yeah.
see,
I
I
was
purposely
assuming
didn't
with this
put the
island-
parameters.
Okay, I was
So,
just like, because my first instinct was like, well, I would grow and make whatever grows best, and maybe it's something I don't even, you know, out of the 10,000 varieties, it's something I never even heard of before. But then I thought, you know what, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to assume that whatever I pick will grow very well, and people will like it.
this is an imagination thing. So that's the whole fun part about it is you can create the climate. Isn't that cool? You get to create that. So I had fun. This was such a cool session getting to meet all of you. I love that the industry is slowly growing diverse wise, and you guys are all examples of it. And you know, you're just a small example of it. And so I hope to do more things with all of you, but I thank you guys. We want to grow the industry. I don't know if we've quite figured out how to convince that next generation that yes, this can be labor intensive, but labor of love. And you guys have shared, which is what we really wanted to get to, is, you know, why you love what you're doing, and that it's not just all labor. And I love, Nova, how you mentioned that, and I think a few of you have mentioned that you get to be a part of it all, that this is something in agriculture that is so different from anything else, that you have the control from beginning to end. And so hopefully we can pull some people. Last winter, I gave a scholarship to a student. She was an agricultural student major at Tuskegee that was transferring to UC Davis. And so, you know, I mean, that was just one, but would it be beautiful if, and I've been trying to get UC Davis to get more with their bridge program that they have with Tuskegee, and I think Valley Ridge or Valley Fort, and I think FAMU to do some kind of shifting to wine. And so if you guys have contacts over there that can help them do better with that, we've given a scholarship of two $5,000 scholarships. And I'm growing that fund. And I would love to be able to give more than just 2 scholarships every year. I would love that.
The only
And
thing that I can say about UC Davis is they're slow and they
okay,
are still working on their diversity program.
okay,
And I think we just have to be patient because in the academic setting, nothing moves quickly.
yeah,
But I do think that they have an intent and a plan in process
hmm,
that is going to be expansive. So I think probably I can put you in touch with the people that I work with over there. And I don't have time to talk to them on a regular basis, but they have a plan that they're working on that
okay,
they are going to hopefully roll out by the end of this year.
okay, and not just UC Davis. I don't know, Shay, if you have any contacts at Wazoo, uh, Cal Poly. These are just some. Cornell comes to mind.
Yep.
And I'm just naming just a few, but it really is going to take some kind of collaboration with them and interning, mentoring. But the scholarship, I think, is huge because that's what's at the forefront of a lot of young people's mind. They might have a career passion, but if they cannot pay for their college, uh, some of them just get discouraged even to go to college, knowing I don't have that money. So, I
Marcia, I
think there's
can get
some
you in
things we
touch
could do.
with people at Cal Poly. They're in the process of
Okay,
archiving the brand, so I'm in
okay,
contact with them pretty often.
okay, okay. Well, so let's do it. Let's start making some connections and putting it out there to students, whether they're in agriculture or maybe just think about wine business, maybe help them shift to wine making, you know, uh, but again, thank you all. Any parting words from you guys before we get out of here?
Well, let me just ask a basic question. I don't know who the audience is because we don't have access to the audience. Uh, but is this going to be made available to students? I mean, part of what I participated in is because I thought it was to
Yeah,
encourage students to go into this industry.
yeah,
But I don't know the audience and I don't know how you plan to get this
yeah.
out to the people that we're targeting.
Right. So I sent emails out. I went online to UC Davis, Cal Poly, Cornell, Tuskegee, FAMU, Washington State, and let them know about this. And I will actually share the video as well.
Okay.
I know it was a Saturday, but I chose not to do a weekday because I didn't want them to say, well, our students uh, can attend, but even professors who say, I'd love to share this during class or during whatever, I will make this available.
Okay.
So if you guys
Okay.
have the contacts, I will make it shareable for anybody. I think you guys had great uh, words to share, words of wisdom, on why this is a wonderful career to have, and so they need to have it. They need to know. And I will definitely make this available. And so, like I said, I don't know what else to do but to let them know we were doing this.
Okay. Well, that was my only question because
Yeah,
I think making it available and getting it out to students is the key.
yeah,
Marcy, one of the programs I'm in, I mentor middle school girls through the Pasco School District. And in our
mhm,
area, there's a huge push on STEM education. In fact, a lot of our schools, it's very integrated, and we have like STEM dedicated schools and programs here.
mhm,
And the program that I'm a mentor in, it is a STEM base. But what's really cool is I was able to take my girls to the WSU Wine Science Center, and these are middle school girls, and so we just looked at the science, really
yeah,
focused on um, like agronomy and the science behind a facility. And we even talked about things like barrel making and the equipment and machines. And so it was very appropriate for the audience.
Yeah.
But I thought what was neat is like looking at this from a perspective of, how are our institutions, like what are they teaching and how can we integrate what we're doing in these spaces into those same things? And that was one of the ways that I found that I could, influence as you're starting to talk to young people about careers and what they want to do, and showing that when you look at STEM-based careers, that winemaking and agriculture is a part of that, and it's not just something that's off to the side. So, I would encourage, as we look at, sometimes for kids when they are, for a lot of us that grew up, outside of winemaking industries, or maybe in families that are not wine drinking sort of families, we may not have known these sort of careers existed. But I think the more that we can show these kind of faces and say that, these careers exist, as you're thinking about going into college, and showing that there are scholarships available to help you out would be key.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with Shay. I mean, the focus on STEM now in school is, that people are really looking at that science, technology, math, engineering. But if you think about what's happening in agriculture and the use of technology in vineyards and drones in vineyards and, NDVIs and, all the technology that goes into, and all the technology that's yet to be invented, that is going to be applicable to our industry. One of the fun things that Cornell is doing is it has the Cornell Agritech campus, which brings together agriculture and technology. And a lot of what we've been talking about is how to bring diverse students into that agriculture technology field, so that they can combine these loves of, robotics and drones and things like that, with how can that apply to agriculture, and how can that make our farming, not just in grapes, but in any farming field, more efficient, or better quality, or something like that. So there's a lot of crossover between STEM and agriculture, and I think we need to focus more on that, so people don't think about, as a farmer you're just a person on a tractor, and that's really very far from where we are anymore.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you guys. Look for me to reach out to you for your connects to really push this agenda and create that next generation of diverse winemakers.
And thank you, Marcy, for introducing all of us, because, it's nice to know other folks in the industry, Nova and Adrian and Melissa and Curtis. Hopefully we can all stay in touch. We have each other's emails. I'm an email person. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Go bring some wine.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, have a great harvest.
Take care.
All right.
I'm going to go drink
Bye-bye.
some Pinot now.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Well, thank you for giving us some time on your Saturdays. And I am going to make this video available to share. So if you know of anybody who missed this, I will post it on my website on the events page. But thank you for giving me your Saturday, or a portion of your Saturday, and have a great rest of the weekend. This is Urban Connoisseur signing off. Bye.